Thank you so much, and sorry for the initial glitch. So welcome to our workshop, Climate Change, Hazard, Vulnerability, Risk, and Criticality Assessment for Road Transport Infrastructure in South Asia. This is based on a project that ADPC is currently doing in the climate adaptation and resilience for South Asia. And thanks to GIG to give us an opportunity to present some of the methodologies and framework. And today we are going to talk about those. So having said that, my name is Nurul. I'm working as a resilient infrastructure specialist and leading the transport as a focal point from ADPC, the resilient transport. We are having a few experts here, and starting with our Deputy Executive Director, Mr. Aslam Parvez, who is a management specialist in disaster risk reduction and climate resilience. He has more than 20 years of management level work on economic analysis, sustainable development, environment, disaster risk reduction, and climate resilience. I'm cordially requesting Mr. Aslam Parvez to start up this session and give us an opening speech here before we move on to the technical stage. Thank you, Aslam.
Nurul, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, thank you very much. And dear listeners and dear participants for this Transport and Climate Change Week session on adaptation and transport. Let me take this opportunity. I am Aslam Parvez from Asian Disaster Preparedness Center. Let me also introduce Asian Disaster Preparedness Center as an autonomous international organization that works to build the resilience of people and institutions to disaster and climate change impacts in Asia and the Pacific. ADPC's strategic vision for resilient transport sector in South and Southeast Asia comes with its thematic focus on infrastructure, including transport infrastructure, directly and indirectly influencing ADPC's work and its attainment to all the SDGs, targets, and indicators. With transport infrastructure being the lifeline linking global economies and societies, the sustainability and resilience of transport are critical for a sustainable development path. Transport, as we all know, enables trade, supports global supply chain, propels growth, and promotes social progress. ADPC's mission encapsulates what ADPC is and what it does in order to support the achievements of its vision of safer communities and sustainable development through disaster risk reduction. The COVID-19 disruption underscored the importance of transport, in particular maritime transport infrastructure, as an essential sector for the continued delivery of critical supplies and global trade in times of crisis, during the recovery stage, and when resuming normality. The sector is now facing not only immediate concern resulting from the pandemic, but also long-term wide-ranging considerations. These include shift in supply chain design, globalization patterns, new consumption and spending habits, a growing focus on risk assessment, adaptation, resilience building, and digital transformation, as well as the heightened global sustainability and low carbon agenda. Today's session and the objective on climate change, hazard, vulnerability, risk, and criticality assessment for road transport sector. I am sure that this will enhance the understanding of climate-related hazard, including climate extreme and climate-induced hazards and their impact on road transport infrastructure, which is very crucial in making decision on climate change adaptation. This workshop certainly will present an approach methodology for hazard, vulnerability, risk, and criticality assessment for road transport infrastructure to support different stakeholders in South Asia to formulate and implement climate change adaptation strategies for climate resilient road transport infrastructure. ADPC is very committed to this particular subject, and I'm thankful to GIZ as well as all the other partners for this Transport and Climate Change Week. With this, I just like to end with the expectation that my colleagues after that would certainly speak a lot on the technicalities, and we look forward to a good conclusion of this particular session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Aslam Parvez, for setting up the stage. Now I'm requesting our colleague, Mr. Anish Joshi, to take up the stage. And Mr. Anish Joshi is working as a GIS and hazard vulnerability and risk assessment specialist with more than 15 years of technical experiences in application of geospatial and Earth observation system approaches in disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation programs. He specializes in multi-hazard risk assessment and development of adaptation and resilience programs in urban and other sectors. So having said that, I would like to invite Mr. Anish to deliver his technical speech here. Over to you, Mr. Anish.
Thank you, Nurul, for your kind introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anish Joshi, currently working for Care for South Asia project at ADPC. I'd like to share my screen before I present. Please give me a few seconds.
Do you have any issue, Anish, here? I can share my screen otherwise.
Give me a second, please. I'm trying to share. Is my screen coming up?
Perfect.
All right, great. Thank you, everyone, once again. Let me start. This is a technical session that we would like to present our existing current work, ongoing work on climate change hazard, vulnerability risks, and criticality assessment for road transport infrastructure in South Asia. This project is being undertaken through World Bank's Care for South Asia project. These are my outlines and agenda that I'd like to discuss here and present. Let me start with the current climate context, especially in this part of the world in South Asia. In last several years, or at least this decade, we've been facing, and we've been experiencing hotter days. We've been experiencing extreme heat events resulting in extreme heat waves, which are actually prolonging in number of days, as well as more frequently occurring. Precipitation rainfall has been increasing severely in monsoon season, as well as in pre and post monsoon season. So these are some of the experiences that we have been facing here. These are the most likely manifestation of climate change, of course. Now, if you see data and statistics, especially in Bangladesh, there's an increase in there would be an increase in temperature by 1.4 degrees centigrade to 2.4 degrees centigrade by 2050 and 2100 by the end of century. So this is quite alarming. And basically, we'll be facing more hotter days in winter, which is quite not normal, actually. Also, there has been projected increase in average temperature by 1 to 2 degrees by 2100. In terms of precipitation, also there is a frequency of tropical cyclones in Bay of Bengal, which will increase by 5 to 10-fold, and also which will result in increase in precipitation by 20 to 30%. Currently, there is a cyclone forming in Bay of Bengal, which is likely to make a landfall sometimes tomorrow, day after. Again, in terms of cyclone, and due to cyclone, there is a potential of rise in sea level by 27 centimeters by 2050. The peak rainfall days have been increasing. Now, having said that, these are the project scenario, but we have already been, observing and facing the consequences, facing the impacts. And one of the profound impact is, of course, in transport sector. Let's come to the Nepal. In Nepal, also by 2080, it's likely that we will face 1.2 degrees centigrade to 4.2 degrees centigrade in rise in temperature, which is quite significant. And there is a rise in temperature, especially in minimum and maximum temperature. Consequently, in Bangladesh, it was rise in average temperature, but it seems in Nepal, there will be rise in minimum and maximum temperature, making our summer and winter more extreme. Similarly, in precipitation, there is an intensity of daily and sub-daily rainfall will significantly increase, resulting in extreme rainfall events, which will increase the surface runoff, which will again, increase the flood events. These are the current scenarios that we have been already observing and encountering. Now, if you see the context of these climate extremes, climate variability, and climate related issues of concern, this will directly impact our road transport infrastructure. In Nepal, back in 2019 and 2021, there has been significant damage and loss in transport infrastructure, especially road and bridges. In 2021 alone, it is estimated that around $25 million worth of road infrastructure has been damaged. We have similar situation or more intense situation in Bangladesh. Back in 2019, the estimated cost of damage was around $73 million. But just a year after, in 2020, it was estimated that around $209 million estimated worth of road assets have been damaged. Now, you could clearly see the increase in damage, increase in loss, and of course, increase in risk. So evidently, due to climate changes and its impact, road transport infrastructure have been severely affected. Now, of course, you can blame to climate change, but again, now the authorities in both Bangladesh and Nepal have started realizing that it's not only climate change, it's our planning phase, it's our design that's flawed, and we need to adapt our planning and our design and all the processes within the road project phase to adapt to climate change. So this is quite evidently that our stakeholders, our road-related agencies have realized that if there is a climate change will impact, but we need to prepare ourselves and make adaptation measures. Having said that, the Care for South Asia project, we have five-fold objective to address climate change, especially in terms of adaptation. We will analyze the existing gaps and opportunities related to climate resilient road infrastructure, both in Nepal and Bangladesh. Based on the piloting, based on the assessment in Nepal and Bangladesh, we will be developing regional level guidelines to cover entire South Asia region. We will be helping our country colleagues, our country agencies, road agencies to develop national strategies for climate resilient transport infrastructure. We will be helping and developing guidelines on climate resilient design of road and bridges. We'll be preparing technical notes on maintenance techniques, rehabilitation, retrofitting, especially targeting to climate resilient road infrastructure. We'll be recommending innovative materials for construction. So this is a five-fold approach that Care for South Asia project's resilient transport sector is adopting. Of course, part of the work is to enhance and build the capacity of our in-country agencies, in-country focal agencies, and other stakeholders. Again, with our work in Bangladesh and Nepal, we will be developing regional level guidelines to cover inter-South Asia region. In Bangladesh, we are partnering with local government engineering development department, LCED. In Nepal, we have two departments, Department of Roads and Department of Local Infrastructure. Now, let me switch back to our overall approach and concept of hazard vulnerability risks criticality assessment. We are following IPCC's fifth assessment report, AR5 report, the definitions, the concept, and the context as described in this report. Our entire framework is based on the recommendations of the IPCC AR5 report. In terms of hazards, we are analyzing what are the climate and climate-induced hazards of concern. Obviously, in Nepal and in Bangladesh, the contexts are different. Also, in other countries of South Asia, the contexts are slightly different, though most of the climate related extremes and climate-induced hazards are very similar, but the scale and context are quite different. So we'll be analyzing what are the climate-related stresses or climate-related extremes of concern. In Nepal, of course, we have heat wave, drought, extreme temperature. In Bangladesh, again, we have extreme temperature, drought, heat waves, and evidently in Nepal, we also have cold wave, but especially a cold wave do not affect transport infrastructure as such, but it affects other sectors, especially in the agriculture sector. In terms of hazard, we'll be identifying what are the hazards and stresses of concern. We'll be analyzing what is the nature of hazard, strength, frequency, time, probability. We'll be modeling hazard and mapping the hazard scenarios. We'll be identifying different hotspots so that we can understand what are the impacts of these climate-related extremes and climate-induced hazards to our road transport infrastructure. Of course, in terms of impact of this from climate-related extremes and climate hazards, we are already facing such impacts. Again, we need to understand what are the impacts, what are the existing impacts, and what are the scenarios, and what will be the potential impact is very important. To understand the existing impact will enable us to project what will be the potential impact in coming future due to climate change, its manifestations. In terms of exposure, of course, the element of our exposure element, risk element is road transport infrastructure and assets. We need to understand what will be the impact of different climate variables, climate extremes and induced hazards into different components of road transport infrastructure itself, whether it's a road network, bridges, or other assets as such. Again, in this decade, we have been facing, we have been observing impacts and losses in all the elements of the road transport infrastructure and all the components of road transport infrastructure. So we need to understand what are the critical impacts, what will be the critical impacts in different elements and different assets of the road itself. Vulnerability. In terms of vulnerability, what are the factors that are driving the vulnerability? Again, the vulnerability is the context or the concept that is independent of hazard, which is basically the inherent property of the system itself. So we'll be analyzing the vulnerability of road transport infrastructure system in border countries, as well as system components in terms of assets, resources, uses, and systems. Systems, in terms of systems, of course, we'll be considering the governance part, we'll be considering the institutional aspect part. So again, having said that, the institutional aspect and governance is also very important, which enables the road transport infrastructure sector and a system to be more resilient. So we need to understand what are the vulnerability components of this system as such. Coming to risks, what is the probability of damage or loss? What are the implications to road system in terms of financial, economic impacts, social impacts, and environmental impacts? This is very critical. We need to understand what will be the damage, what will be the potential damage and loss. For that, we need to understand what is existing damage and loss. So again, this is again based on information, based on data, based on assessment and modeling. Now, in road sector, the understanding of the importance of road elements and road network is very important. This is what we call criticality. And basically, the criticality assessment is done to understand which road component or which road segment is important for various aspects. It could be socio-economic aspect, it could be the economic or GDP of the country or the region, or it could be system functionality. So we need to understand which is the critical component of road system itself, so that adaptation option can specifically target to this critical and very important road sector or road component. So overall, this is our framework that we opted to follow IPCC's AR5 framework and adapt to our road transport infrastructure system. So based on this framework, we are undertaking various scientific and technical studies. Again, the question is why hazard, vulnerability, risks, and critical assessment road is important. Why do we need to do this? Again, we understand that from planning to the end of the operation and maintenance, the road transfer infrastructure, the road development phase itself is very critical. It is very finances intensive, technical intensive. So to understand where the road should plan, where the roads should be planned, to understand what are the components or what are the geometric properties, what are the engineering design contexts, and what are the materials that can be used so that the road infrastructure is resilient to different aspects of climate change is very important. So to understand these issues and to actually mainstream climate change adaptation into the road development phase, we need to embed a vulnerability, hazard, vulnerability, risk, and criticality assessment methods from planning phase until the operation and maintenance phase. So for each phase of road development, this particular assessment is very important. Again, the scope and scale of the assessment would be different, but again, from planning phase to operation and maintenance phase, the concept of hazard, vulnerability, risks, and its importance is very important as such. So we'll be developing tools and methods and approaches so that we can mainstream hazard, vulnerability, and criticality assessment into each phase of this road development phases. Now let's move to a bit technical part. I would like to briefly overview the technical aspect of hazard, vulnerability, and risk assessment, especially adopted by GIFO South Asia project. Basically, we opted to follow some of the international best practices, use cases, both in Western countries and as well as in Southeast Asia region. These are some of the good documents and good practices that we have followed. Besides this, we have done comprehensive assessment, need assessment in terms of our stakeholders and in terms of country-wise needs. So based on our own need assessment, we have developed our approach. Our approach basically models climate-induced climate extremes, climate-induced hazards based on regional models, as well as in situ and hydrometric data from water countries, past climate scenarios. We will be modeling climate change. Actually, we have modeled climate change for both RCP 4.5 and RCP 8.5 for 2030, 2050, and 2080 horizons, 3 climate horizons and 3 temporal horizons actually. So based on these climate models and climate change assessment, we will be analyzing climate-induced hazards as well as climate extremes. In terms of climate extremes, we'll be analyzing hot days, cold days, and drought as such. In terms of climate hazard, induced hazard, I will be analyzing a landslide, especially rainfall-induced landslide, flood, fluvial flood, and coastal flood in case of Bangladesh, as well as pluvial flood, flash flood. We are analyzing coastal flood in case of cyclones and storm surges. Based on this hazard assessment, especially in terms of climate extremes and climate-induced hazard, we will be doing observed impact assessment or impact attribution. We need this impact attribution to understand what will be the potential impact in future horizons in 2030, 2050, and 2080. Based on these analysis, we'll be doing exposure assessment, exposure in terms of road assets exposure, road transport infrastructure exposure, vulnerability assessment in terms of system vulnerability, in terms of system component vulnerability or physical vulnerability. Now, based on this impact assessment, exposure assessment, and vulnerability assessment, we come up with a risk assessment representing potential or probability of damage and loss in terms of financial loss or financial damages or recovery cost. Again, a part of the work is criticality assessment. We need to understand which particular road network or road segment or system component is critical for operationalization or for functioning of the entire transportation system. For that, we need socioeconomic data. So based on all this analysis at the end of the day, we need to understand, we will understand that what are the potential risks and what are the drivers of risk, whether it's a direct drivers or indirect drivers. Now, to understand, by understanding of the drivers of risks, we will be able to adapt, we'll be able to target or address these drivers with adaptation options. So at the end of the day, we'll be proposing various adaptation options and preparing the strategies based on our assessments. Again, coming back to climate-related extremes, we have increased hot days or heat waves, which actually impacts surface of road transport or surface of roads. And these are some of the climate-related extremes and climate-induced hazards we'll be analyzing. Let me just dive into a bit detail in terms of our approach. In terms of hazard assessment, we have done climate modeling. I can show you some examples. At this point, we are doing climate change stresses or climate extreme assessments. We're also mapping climate hotspots. We have already started with the mapping landslides. We are undertaking flood modeling using 1D and 2D modelings. We have started with cyclones and coastal floods. In terms of climate change modeling and climate change corrections, some of the examples, some of the methods that we have opted is we are using global daily downscale models, and downscaling this global and regional model to national level or model or local level model at 1 by 1 kilometer resolution. So this is very high resolution. So we are generating very high resolution 1 by 1 kilometer climate change models and projection data. Has some of the examples. This is an example from Nepal. On the left is precipitation, and on the right is precipitation or rainfall hotspots. So these are some of the examples that we have, some of the maps that we have been preparing. Based on these maps, we will understand where are the climate hotspots. Now we will be doing several field works in these climate hotspots to understand what are the impacts, observed impact in road transport infrastructure itself. We have done similar examples, similar exercises in Bangladesh. One of the climate-induced hazard, the prominent hazard is landslide, of course. In Nepal, landslide is very prominent, and in Bangladesh, especially in hill tract districts, landslide is very prominent, and it has affected road transport infrastructure. For landslide, we have two-phase approach. In the first phase, we have assessed landslide susceptibility at the regional level, taking some pilot districts and provinces in Nepal and Bangladesh. We have used integrated weighted index method for landslide susceptibility using various factors, including geological and environmental factors. Now, based on this landslide susceptibility, we have identified landslide hotspots, and these landslide hotspots will be doing very detailed assessment using drone UAV surveys to reconstruct some of the representative landslides so that we understand the mechanism of landslide, and we also understand what are the actually intensity of hazards for these different kinds of landslides. So based on this detailed assessment, including geotechnical and geophysical survey, we will be modeling landslide hazard in terms of its intensity. It could be runoff distance, it could be area and volume of debris as such. These are some of the examples that we have already completed. This is for two provinces in Nepal. This is for Rangamati district in Bangladesh. Once again, we are still in the process of developing these models and doing the assessment. So I won't be able to present all the results yet. We'll present these results sometimes later in the year or next year. Other climate-induced hazard is, of course, flood, which is very prevalent in both Nepal and Bangladesh. In Nepal, we are using open LISEM model, using global data set, and also in situ hydrometeorological measurements to calibrate the data, to calibrate the model. I will be using some SAR images to already map existing floods or past floods so that we can calibrate the open LISEM model. In Bangladesh, there is already good 1D and 2D model developed by national organizations. We will be using SOBEC model to analyze flood inundation at regional level and also at local level for our pilot districts. In terms of cyclone, we have already started some work. We have some draft outputs already. We have opted to use Australian's this Geoscience Australia tropical cyclone model, and adopting this model, especially in case of South Asia region, especially for Bay of Bengals. So based on this model, we'll be generating synthetic records of past cyclones. And with these synthetic models, so we will be able to understand what will be the potential cyclone events in the region. So based on the cyclone model, we'll be developing storm surge and coastal flooding models. These are some of the examples of our existing ongoing work for hazard assessment. The next step or the next parallel step is impact characterization or impact assessment. We are analyzing what are the already observed impacts in road transport infrastructure due to these climate extremes and climate-induced hazard. Based on the assessment, field assessment and stakeholder discussions, so we'll be able to understand what are the observed impacts. And based on these observed impacts, we can project what could be the future impact, also considering the different climate change scenarios. These are some of the observed impacts that we come across through various literature studies. It's not only climate-induced hazard like flood, landslide, it's also slow onset of climate phenomena, climate extremes like hot days, cold days, that actually have severe impact and affects the road transport infrastructure itself, especially in terms of road surface, in terms of road subgrade. So not only climate hazards or climate-induced hazard, it's also slow onset of climate-related extremes that impacts road transport infrastructure. There are some examples that we came across through our research and literature review. Pavement degradation, especially due to surface runoff, extreme precipitation, blocked fall from pavements, again, due to surface runoff and precipitation, material recovery from bituminous layer. It could be due to extreme heat as well. And of course, water is a major factor that influences or that affects the road surface and subgrade. Potholes, rotting basically due to extreme temperature. Some examples of climate-induced hazards, especially flood and landslide. There are some examples of Nepal, and there are similar examples in Bangladesh. In flat area, in plain area, of course, flood is very prevalent, an annual event. It impacts road surface, also impacts traffic. Landslide is very prevalent in hill regions of Nepal and Bangladesh. Again, it blocks major road. Here are some of the examples from our initial field observation. Now, on the left bottom, it's a local road. Again, this is a rock fall. On the center, middle, it's a major highway that connects Kathmandu to Chinese border, and it's a major landslide that occurred back in 2012. Now, again, you could see a local road here, and there's a massive landslide here affecting the local road. So it's not only highways, local road, and municipal road, district roads also have been severely impacted by different kinds of hazard as such. For exposure, our elements at risk is, of course, road network and road assets. We are using comprehensive GIS database from our focal agencies, and to understand what are the impacts of hazards, we are overlaying this road database, road information with different hazard contexts and hazard scenarios. There are some of the preliminary examples. One of the critical factors that we came across is how to represent exposure. What is the scale? What is the level of representation? Whether we analyze entire road link from point A to B, or whether we analyze sublink or subsegment. Now, based on our analysis, based on our results or outputs of different hazard scenario, we have been able to develop very detailed, very high resolution landslide models as well as flood models. And so based on the resolution of the hazard models, we have opted to use road segment or road subsegment as a representation for exposure. This is an example of road subsegment in Nepal. Now, based on the scale and based on the available data, we have done some preliminary analysis. This is an example of road exposure to strategic road network and district road network in Nepal. Obviously, if you see different climate horizons and landslide scenarios, you could obviously see that in 2030, 2050, and 2080, in comparison to base year, the landslide susceptibility for road is high and very high susceptibility has increased significantly. Consequently, low and moderate has also increased. Consequently, very low susceptibility has decreased. So this points to the fact that due to extreme climate events, landslide susceptibility is higher, and due to higher landslide susceptibility, the impacts on road sector is much higher. This is district road network. Again, there are two scenarios. So strategic road network, which is basically highways and major road, and there are district road network, which is basically district and local road network. It's a similar pattern in district road network as well in Nepal. High and very high susceptibility categories will increase in 2030, 2050, and 2080. Now, if you go into more details on the types of road, this is an example of Rangamati district, Kaptai, Upazila, and Rangamati district. So we have been able to go in much detailed level. We have also assessed different types of road hierarchy, and what are the impacts of climate change induced or rainfall induced landslide in these different types of road. So obviously, high and very high susceptibility will increase in 2030, 2050, and 2080. Similar kind of pattern in different regions of Bangladesh as well. So these are preliminary results from both Nepal and Bangladesh. Now, with the understanding of exposure levels, quantifying the exposure, what amount or what is the length of exposed road, what are the number of assets, what is the impacts in bridges, what is the exposure level of bridges. So we will be able to understand, or we will be able to model physical vulnerability of these assets and road infrastructure. Now, it's not only physical vulnerability, it's also system vulnerability as such. For vulnerability assessment, we are developing different indicators in coordination and collaboration and consultation with our stakeholders, but in Nepal and Bangladesh. Again, the indicators would be slightly different in Nepal and Bangladesh, also due to different types of road and different jurisdiction of road with different agencies, the indicators might be a bit different. At this stage, we are in consultation with our stakeholder agencies, but in Bangladesh and Nepal. So to represent vulnerability, we are representing vulnerability in terms of sensitivity or susceptibility and adaptive capacity. For sensitivity, we have proposed several high-level indicators. Again, for these high-level indicators, we are developing sub-indicators, and we are actually trying to quantify these indicators in terms of the real quantification, real values. Also, we are currently, starting with weighing assessment of indicators so that we can develop this integrated weighing assessment method to represent sensitivity and adaptive capacity. So in terms of sensitivity, we are opting to use different parameters of road, including chapter 5, design parameters, engineering parameters, availability of existing returning structures in terms of landslide, cross drainage, surface drainage, flood training works, and all other physical parameters that can be represented and quantified. And also represents the sensitivity of road transport infrastructure itself. Adaptive capacity in terms of population shock, in terms of its importance, in terms of connectivity and mobility, in terms of institutional aspect, in terms of financial aspect, and also in terms of sector policy and strategy. So currently we have started discussing with our stakeholders to formulate indicators and sub-indicators and to quantify these indicators. Now, based on these assessment of hazard, impact, exposure, and vulnerability, our risk assessment will project what will be the likely or potential damage and loss in terms of probability. So we'll be representing this damage and loss in terms of economic loss, in terms of economic loss model, or also will be in terms of recovery costs as such, or reconstruction or rehabilitation costs. To that, we are starting with developing vulnerability curves or probability of damage and loss curves. We have already done some examples. For flood, there is a regional level of flood vulnerability, especially for road sector. We will be adopting this regional level vulnerability or fragility curve to suit with both Bangladesh and Nepal, based on field study, based on past records of damage and losses with our government entities, focal agencies, and also from existing literature reviews. For landslide, there are very limited, almost non-existent this landslide intensity versus a damage curve or fragility curve. So we are opting to develop our own model based on literature review, based on simulated bottleneck lane distribution model for different types of road in terms of road lane, in terms of surface drainage. So preliminarily, we have come up with this model or function for different types of or different levels of landslide magnitude in terms of volume, but for rock fall and debris flow, we have come up with this probability of damage and loss. So we'll be further refining this model and adapting to both Nepal and Bangladesh. Now, coming to the last stage of the entire assessment, the criticality assessment. Basically, the hazard, exposure, vulnerability, and risks projects what will be the potential risks and impacts. Now, criticality is a bit different. Criticality assesses what are the critical components or critical segment of road which needs to be addressed urgently or addressed immediately. So basically, it could be critical road in terms of System criticality, or the functioning of a road system or road transport network system. If there is a landslide somewhere, the entire road system, road network could be disrupted. So whether that particular segment where landslide occur is important or not in terms of functioning of a road segment is very important. Or consequently, the criticality can also be defined as a function of the entire system as such. In terms of socioeconomic performance, for example, for economic, if point A to B is economically very important locations in the country or region, the road linking this point A to B is very important, very critical. So this critical road segment needs to be addressed in terms of adaptation and mitigation. So we'll be defining this criticality in terms of system criticality to address the functioning of a system. It can be link criticality or node critical centrality, I would say, system centrality, link or node centrality. In terms of traffic performances, whether traffic would be disrupted due to some hazard event, whether it's landslide or flood or some other events which causes damage to road surface. It could be emergency performance, especially in terms of disaster reduction, whether the road segment is strategic or critical road or not. In terms of socioeconomic performance or economic activity and mobility of agriculture sector or other freight system. So these are some of the examples where we need to consider which we need to consider for defining the criticality of roads. Again, we are discussing this definition with our focal agencies, and focal agencies will have their own definition. And again, for both Bangladesh and Nepal and other parts of the South Asia region, the definition might be different. So this is the part of the work that we are currently starting. Now, having said that, with all these technicalities, we are again at the position of ongoing work. The work is still ongoing. We are planning to complete this hazard vulnerability risks and criticality assessment by end of this year. We have progress with some deliveries, some outputs as such, especially for landslides and our climate models. So this is overall our ongoing work, acquisition of and development of data. We are currently developing climate models, landslide models, and flood models. We have acquired road segment data, and we are studying the road segment data from our road network data from our stakeholders, from our focal agencies. And in all these stages, we are closely collaborating with our focal agencies, both in Nepal and Bangladesh. We are planning for detailed field studies for both landslide and flood in coming months. Based on these studies, models, and field study, we are starting with hazard vulnerability and risk assessment. Based on our risk assessment, hazard vulnerability assessment, we are proposing adaptation and risk management options. We are developing different guidelines, technical documents, and recommendations. Again, part of the work is dissemination and institutional capacity building, both in Nepal and Bangladesh. Our strategy for sustainability and installation of this process, this technical process, is again very important. We are incorporating this climate change hazard vulnerability risks and criticality assessment in climate resilient transport infrastructure national strategies, the strategies that we are developing. We are helping our national agencies to develop. So the part of the strategy will be hazard vulnerability risks and criticality assessment. Again, to support this, we'll be developing different guidelines and tools in English as well as in national languages, so that our local agencies and local stakeholders can follow each step and mainstream the entire process in their road sector development framework and projects. Key activity is, of course, our capacity building. By the onset of 2023, we will be starting various trainings to our stakeholders at national level as well as in regional level. Another strategy is, of course, starting our online or virtual platform. In ADPC, we have ADPC Academy. So we are planning to start this hazard vulnerability risks and capacity criticality assessment as a technical model. Perhaps in 2023 and 2024, we plan to start this assessment technical method through ADPC Academy. Again, a part of the work is networking and partnership with focal agencies, of course, as well as center of excellence in country, as well as in region, different training institutes, academia, universities. We're also looking forward to embed this method in some of the engineering courses, especially related to transport sector and road design. There are several courses, both in Nepal and Bangladesh, where this method can be implemented as an elective subject or as a specialized subject itself in the academic sector. So these are our five-fold strategy where we can ensure institutionalization and sustainability of this entire hazard vulnerability risks and criticality assessment process. Of course, we understand that this is very technical, but again, with capacity building, with networking, with starting with learning platform, this method can be disseminated to wider audience, wider users, not only in our project countries, but throughout the South Asia region as well. And we hope to share the entire methodology, with international audience as well through similar platform with GIG and other development partners as well. So with that, I would like to conclude my presentation. Once again, thank you so much for audience for your patience. Again, I'd like to thank my transport team. If you have any questions and queries, please direct to me in this mail address, as well as to my colleague Nurul in his mailing address. We'll be sharing this slide to you. I hope this general approach and methodological framework is quite understandable, and we hope that we will come back to you with further results in coming months and by the end of this year. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Mr. Anish, and quite an excellent presentation. And I think our audiences got it very rightly, and they got a lot of interest out of it. So we got few comments already and queries. One is, of course, a very enlightening presentation. These analyses could really help prevent major damage in areas vulnerable to climate change. Thanks for the comment. A question for us is, thanks for sharing these frameworks and example. Considering it can be quite technical, can we have do we have any tips or experiences for discussing these kind of technical findings and recommendations with decision makers and local communities? Would you like to take this call, Anish?
Thank you for this very pertinent query. Indeed, actually, what I would like to highlight here is even in the development of this method, we have been consulting and collaborating with our focal agencies and other stakeholders. So it's not that we develop the method and we hand over everything as a ready-made black box. That's not our approach. We've been collaborating with our stakeholders since the onset of the development phase. We have had several, technical discussions at the country level. We are further discussing with our focal agencies and our stakeholders to get their input, so that they understand the entire process and they are on board while developing the process itself. Now, that's our local stakeholders. Now, coming to disseminating the information, disseminating the process, or actually having validated our approach to international audience, we have prepared several scientific papers. At this point, we have actually submitted 2 scientific papers for landslide sustainability assessment. There has been very good positive reviews. These will probably be published and online in the journals in coming months. We look forward to publish more scientific papers so that our technical method is widely reached, widely acknowledged, and also validated. So that is one approach. Again, a part of our work is capacity building. We understand that for some stakeholders, these various steps, especially considering the climate change context, would be very overwhelming and it could be a steep learning curve. But we are taking a gradual process. We have conducted capacity need assessment and part of the entire as a part of the capacity building framework itself. So by the end of this year, we'll be starting several technical trainings to our stakeholders, focal agencies, and other external partners, so that this is not limited to selected few, but this gets a wider audience and wider users. So yes, it's a very important question and rightly pointed out, and we have capacity building and dissemination strategy in place. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anishji. We have only 2 more minutes for taking the last questions from audience. The very interesting presentation indeed. have you encountered any challenges when dealing with the private sector? I may try to answer here as well. Like this project, we are mostly approaching to our public sector's stakeholders. And whenever we are going to the private sector, we are going through them. And we are very thankful to our public stakeholders, the government stakeholders, to provide us all the supports to reach to those private sector. But Anish, if you want to add anything over here?
Yes,
we have one more minute.
Yes, very briefly. In terms of private sector, also we are collaborating with private sector also as well, especially in terms of taking up some of this technical assessment work. We are opting to take support from national and international consulting firms to support in some of the key technical aspects of our entire transport sector. So yes, again, we are partnering with private sector nationally as well as internationally.
Thank you so much, Anish, for your enlightening presentation, and I hope the audiences, they learned a lot. So upon the last 5 minutes, I would request now our Director of Geospatial Department, ADPC, Dr. Piranha. Dr. Piranha is he is working as the Director of Geospatial Department, as I said. Previously, he worked as a senior engineer at AIR Worldwide Corporation, a premier catastrophe risk modeling firm in the United States. Having said that, I would request Dr. Piranha to please take up this stage and put up some concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Nurul. It's been an honor for me to be here. So I just want to quickly address all the participants, both in the Zoom meeting as well as those who are online watching the live stream. Now, we have seen the presentation from Mr. Anish. He has presented the framework and steps for conducting the hazard, vulnerability, risk, and criticality assessments for the road transport infrastructures. I believe you must have noticed and realized by now that these assessments will give us a very much needed information and evidence on the intensity and frequency of external threats, such as flooding and landslides, as well as long-term changes of climatic patterns, such as increase in the number of rainy days, increase in hot days, for example. But more importantly, these information provide us with an understanding of how much of an impact, both in terms of physical as well as financial, on the infrastructures that we can expect if we do not do anything now. Finally, the last piece of the work is on the criticality assessment. I think this is important because it gives us a full picture of how critical the road infrastructure or the part of it are important compared to the other connected systems and services, such as the traffic and emergency functions, as well as socio-economic aspect of the infrastructure. So all these things give us, again, an evidence that if and when these transport infrastructures are damaged from climatic events, the impact of it will be felt far and beyond the physical damage that we see by our own eyes. It will go beyond just the cracks on the roads. It will go beyond the collapse of the bridge. It will impact the livelihood. So we gotta do something. We gotta use this information to better manage existing infrastructures, as well as better plan for new constructions in a risk-sensitive and resilient manner. So all of these examples that Anish presented in the session today, they came from the regional program of ADPC called Climate Adaptation and Resilience for South Asia. This is a World Bank funded project implemented by ADPC, as well as the Regional Integrated Multi-Hazard Early Warning System, or RAMS. Although the aim of this project is to help countries in South Asia, including Nepal and Bangladesh, to develop a system and environment for climate resilience policies and investment for the transport sector, it does not mean that the approaches and the methodologies that we presented today cannot be applied elsewhere. Our own geographic remit of ADPC cover all of Asia and the Pacific. So we will be happy and gladly to take this knowledge, the tools, the lessons that we learned from this Care for South Asia project to work with anyone in the rest of Asia You know us already, so let's stay connected after the session. So to this end, I would like to express our sincere gratitude from ADPC to the organizer of this event, which is GISAT. I want to also especially thank Mr. Anish Joshi and Mr. Nurul who have been the main persons for this work and for this session. I want to thank the whole ADPC team who has been supporting this event as well. I want to thank our counterparts in Nepal, Department of Roads and Department of Local Infrastructures, as well as in Bangladesh, the Local Government Engineering Department, for their continuing support on the project. Last but not the least, I want to thank all the participants for the active engagement throughout the session. As I said before, let us stay connected. For the time being, let me close this session and wish everyone good health. Thank you very much.